Winsor, author and expert. He is the founder and chairman of Open Assembly and one of the co-authors of Open Talent. So, John, I'd like to ask you to come on camera, and if you could give everyone an introduction of yourself to start with.
Hi. Hi, how's everybody doing today? I hope everybody's good here in Boulder. I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and it's been really, really cold. So I was telling Colson earlier that, man, it's so cold that we couldn't start our cars in the last couple of days. So we're nice and bundled and here on the webinar. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a longtime entrepreneur and been working on trying to figure out alternative staffing and talent questions for a long, long time. The first part of my career was really around building businesses that answer those questions, more because I was a small entrepreneurial company and wanted to compete with global organizations. And it just happened along the way by intuition, really, to figure out how to use variable cost labor versus fixed cost labor that things really blew up. So I'm happy to share the kind of the origin story of that if there's time today.
Great. I'm excited to hear about that. Can you tell us a little bit about Open Talent, the book that you wrote with Jen Pike, who isn't here today, but give us a little more detail about your book and what it covers.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is really a culmination of this 25 years of this journey. And back when I owned Women's Sports and Fitness, a magazine, I bought the magazine from Time Inc. And they were really struggling with it. One of the things that was difficult is their costs were just so high. They had 40 editors and writers in New York. And so the way that they would work is they would actually send a writer out to interview a world-class runner, let's say, in London. And maybe the writer didn't really understand the nuances of competing at a world-class level, so maybe didn't quite get the facts right, and there was a lot of difficulty with being authentic in that way. And so to make the magazine work for me, I actually only hired 2 editors that were really good athletes, but then let the readers of the magazine write their own stories and had the editors edit them so that they're really authentic. And that was a huge success, a new model for publishing. And 15 years later, we sold the magazine to Condé Nast, and that kind of set me on this journey of how do I use this kind of new variable cost business model. Open Talent came from after building a few companies. I ended up at Harvard Business School. And I ended up there because they did a couple of case studies on me on my company called Victors and Spoils that I launched in 2009, and then also the company that I sold to called Havas. And it was all around, can a new startup that has this variable cost talent model affect a large incumbent organization? And after studying that, they asked me to come in and start a lab called the Laboratory for Innovation Sciences at Harvard with Kareem Lakhani and,
Uh-huh.
and Jen Pike. And from that work, they've been doing research since 2007 and working with NASA to develop the Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. And COSI now has a budget of $185 million and gives NASA the ability to tap into 110 million people across the globe to leverage their knowledge and solve their biggest problems. So the book really came out of that. During, things were cruising along, and my company launched out of the lab to do kind of commercial things, helping companies and organizations like WEF, World Economic Forum,
Mhm.
and Accenture figure out some of these issues around talent. And obviously when COVID hit, the world changed, right? No longer were we going to the office. No longer did we have kind of 9-to-5 schedules. Things got thrown upside down. And it was a real opportunity to think about talent in a new way. And part of our community at Open Assembly was just a very small group of folks. There were 5 of us that were meeting on a regular basis. Diane Finkhausen from General Electric, Balaji Bandili from Deloitte, Steve Rader from NASA, and myself. And as those conversations started accelerating, helping each other out, we decided to open that up to the world when COVID hit, and 4,000 people joined the conversation. So we've had this kind of robust community that really helps us think through what the new models are. And that's where the book came from, is the community and our research at Harvard. Really, the goal of the book is to create common language and common process to this new world of talent. And we feel like whether it's HR or outsourcing or staffing, really all those processes are pretty old now. They're analog processes, right? And so being able to launch something that's a new mindset around being digital and what we call a networked organization, but a digital mindset, a digital culture that allows for a new way of working with people that's more flexible and gives people the freedom to kind of work when they want and how they want.
Yeah, that's great. And just to remind everybody, if they are interested in obviously learning more about the book, and they want to read it, where do you recommend that they can get access to?
They can just go to the website opentalentbook.com, and
Okay.
there's lots of choices on places that they might want to buy the book.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so it did yesterday was the release date, so congratulations on that.
Mhm.
We
Thanks
have
so much.
yeah, exciting discussion. I'd like to start with, and it's something you just kind of touched upon, is in the new world of work, right? Things
Mhm.
have changed obviously with COVID, and
Right.
in the book you declare that the war for talent is over and the talent won.
Yeah.
Um, so can you tell us what you're seeing about people setting their own terms for platforms, especially like freelancer.com, Fiverr, and Upwork, and some of these other platforms where we see kind of this kind of gig economy evolving?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, let's launch into the difference between gig economy and open talent. So I think the gig economy has had an amazing effect on, the economy overall, both good and bad, right? It's definitely been dominated by people like Uber and Grubhub and people like that. One of the things that's happened is that, in the gig economy, we see it as different than open talent in that it's really driven by algorithms and a worker's told where to go and when to work and how to work. So I'm going to pick up somebody at the airport to, be able to bring them to wherever they need to go. And they set the terms for that. Um, so we look at the open talent marketplace as much higher level where it's freelancers that are setting their own terms to work, and really digital entrepreneurs or micro entrepreneurs. You see this, one of the most fascinating pieces of data that I've seen lately is that on YouTube, um, that these new creative class or open talent, and I think creative class is part of this creative, the creative economy. Um, they've been able to generate $39 billion worth of advertising revenue that have
Wow.
gone to creators. And what's fascinating in the US, that's bigger than the furniture industry and right behind the railroad delivery industry. So what you're seeing this percolate from the bottom up. I come from the marketing advertising business.
Mhm.
And in 2012, there were about 600,000 people that work in the advertising business, formal advertising business. In 2023, the same number. What's changed is there's 60 million people that have joined the ranks as creators doing their own work as, as individuals in this same
Right.
market. So it's become really competitive. So the first thing that you have to look at is kind of the digitization of the world, right? So what I mean by, the war for talent is over, talent won, is that now individuals have the ability to compete globally with almost anybody, right? One person in a room can do amazing things. I think about it, like I referenced women's sports and fitness, and we had 120 people that worked globally for women's sports and fitness that were doing all the steps. I would assume now, just thinking about where things have gone, we could probably produce the same um, amount of material and reach a lot more people for maybe 3 or 4 people. So that kind of drive of digitization and drive of kind of the disintermediation of this kind of middle layer. And
Right.
so what we're seeing is that so that's one effect, right? This digitization of the world. The other effect that's really happening is that, for 100 years, the demand side set the terms of employment. This is where you're going to work. This is what the time is. This is how much you're going to get paid because there was more supply than there was demand. In today's world, there's more demand than there is supply, especially in the tech world. Korn Ferry estimates that there will be 85 million tech jobs globally that will go unfilled between now and 2030. And that's going to cost companies $8.5 trillion. And
Wow.
so with this desperate need for labor, especially for tech labor,
Mhm.
tech talent gets to set their own terms, right? They're
Yeah.
going to work when they want, where they want, and how much they're going to charge. And platforms just take the friction out of that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting. One thing, especially from BlueSteps, we've noticed is this idea of like fractional work or
Exactly.
interim roles.
Yep.
Is there anything you can comment on that? Like, are you seeing executives kind of go into setting their own terms on platforms using kind of the idea of a fractional role as well?
Yeah, no, I think that's part of the same trend, right? It's like,
Mhm.
especially, you know, every growing company needs talent better than they have right now, right?
Yeah.
So so they're always trying to say, I need, I'm going to build and I'm growing and I need this next level of talent. Unfortunately, they probably can't afford it in the current model. And so what happens is that fractional works really well for everybody. If you're looking for the next step up in kind of financial, complexity or financial sophistication, you probably can't hire the CFO that's worked for bigger companies that can bring you that expertise, but you certainly can pay them on a fractional basis. And likewise, for people that are more senior in their careers, they like the diversity of jobs. They like having a portfolio of relationships because they learn a lot too, right? And they
Yeah.
probably make a lot, and they will make a lot more money than they would if they just work for one company.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of see these, I would say new avenues or opportunities, right, for executives to open up,
Yeah,
especially with,
exactly.
like fractional and just even with platforms like Freelancer and Fiverr, right? The opportunities or the skill sets, you find a lot of varied skill sets
Yeah.
on these platforms. You talked a little bit about your background and the pioneering techniques you've discovered that maximize talents and ideas. But what should companies be doing when they face the challenges of the future of work? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a bunch of factors here, right? And they all kind of are leaning in the direction of open talent. So let's first bite off and talk a little bit about AI, right? That's the hot conversation right now. Generative AI and how does it affect people and what people are going to be thinking about. So the way that I look at the world is that, there's two things, right? From a company perspective, there are constantly challenges, right? And those challenges are accelerating. And so if you if Colson, if I said, oh, you're going to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and you just got promoted, and you say, oh, in this new position, one of the things that I have to do is create a AI strategy. Now, the old way of doing it, right, is to go to your CHRO and say, hey, I need to hire an SVP of AI. But
Mhm.
you know as well as I do that that's going to take like 6 to 8 months, right, to find
Right.
somebody that is skilled at that, but also knows your business well enough to lead that. And then when she comes in, she's going to take, 4 to 5 to 6 months to hire her team because the demand of labor in that marketplace. And then it's going to take 3 months for them to write the strategy. And you're looking at 18 months down the road. And in
Mhm.
today's environment, an AI strategy that takes 18 months to develop is not a strategy at all, right?
Right.
So the alternative, right, is to use open talent mindset and networked organization mindset and to think about it in a different way. Instead of thinking about roles that lead to tasks that lead to outcomes, I think
Mhm.
it's just flipping that upside down to say, okay, what is the outcome I need? I need to really focus on having a strategy for AI. And what are the tasks that need to be done to do that? And so one of the ways to start that conversation is to say, you would go to a couple platforms, such as say BTG, Business Talent Group, or maybe you would go to Graphite and you would recruit 10 experts in the field that could spend 2 days with you in London, and you would have an offsite and say, okay, guys, let's define, the 100 tasks that need to be done to write a strategy on AI. Who can do what? Oh, some internal people can do some things. These external folks can do some things. And that will, accelerate. And, in that scenario, you can get a strategy done in, what do you think, a month, maybe 5 weeks. So,
Right.
that strategy might be only 85% as good as the one in 18 months, but the one in 18 months is totally irrelevant. And so, the one that you have in 4 to 6 weeks is awesome. So that's the first thing, right? And then the second thing I think that's happening is that, if you ask anybody what their budget was for AI before last November when OpenAI launched, I would, at least the feedback I get when I'm out in the world is that there's only, a couple, about a small percentage of companies that had a budget at all. And so
Right.
now everybody does. And so in order to get to the future for any organization, you have to have a really strong balance sheet, right?
Mhm.
And so to do that, the best way to do that is to take more fixed costs and make them variable costs. And for every organization, the biggest fixed cost is labor. And so as you can imagine, I mean, I just run these scenarios through my head is like, just think you're a CEO and you just approved in, September of 2022, a massive addition to, a bunch of tech talent, let's say 1,000 people, to be able to do something, that's important to you strategically. And along comes AI and makes that irrelevant. So you've got to actually lay off 1,000 people and then hire another 1,000 people. That's going to take months to do
Yeah,
without
or
the
years.
ability to turn on and turn off those kind of dials, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting actually because we did a webinar a couple of weeks ago on AI, and one of the questions we asked the audience is if you had plans to do any AI-based projects, right? And the majority of the response that we got from a lot of folks was small, yes, but on a small scale, maybe
Right.
a project for testing, right? So you're talking about AI. A lot of folks who were on that call on that webinar said, they really were only thinking about testing AI. They're
Right.
not even thinking about like AI strategies
Right.
on a large scale for their organization, right? And so we're seeing that kind of shift too. There's one thing that you mentioned. You talked about open talent and network organizations. Just for everyone listening in, can you give the two differences between those various people and how you define those two terms for everyone?
Right. Yeah, sure. So open talent is kind of the open talent economy, thinking about it, globally. Networked organization is the type of organization, and we would suggest that a networked organization is built purposefully for the future to allow for the organization to work with a variety of different kinds of skills and kinds of ways. I mean, one of the things I find fascinating when we've researched organizations is that if you ask most HR departments, they would say, "Oh, this is our employee base." But they never even mention the relationships they have with vendors like outsourcing companies,
Hmm.
because those guys are all hired by the procurement team. And so you've got this kind of really interesting duality of most organizations. In fact, one platform was working with a big pharmaceutical company, and they asked, like, what's your global workforce? And they said, well, our global workforce is 6,000 people. And when they went out and they kind of accounted for everybody that works on the business, whether it's internal or it's external, that actually the number was 32,000 people. And so
Wow.
grossly underestimating the number. So network organization takes that perspective of like who's everybody that works in the organization? How do we get them to build, to play in a networked culture? And
Mhm.
so we think that there's like three legs to this stool, the open talent stool, that gives people the ability to build a networked organization. And those are building external talent clouds,
Mhm.
building internal talent marketplaces, and building open innovation capabilities.
Wow. And do you find that that's obviously the demand for like kind of these networked organizations is growing in terms of like the global workforce for companies, both big and small? Um, is that something that you guys have seen that, there's more organizations who are kind of leaning towards that and having larger, like, contractor basis
Yeah,
workforce?
I think that's happening. I mean, I think there's a couple of really interesting dynamics, right? At the really small level, at the kind of the seed round VC level. It's like everything else, right? It's throwing things into chaos, AI and open talent. So, most startups, the way that they work is they say, okay, I need to go raise money. So I'm going to need 10 software engineers full time at $100,000. So I need at least $1 million to cover that. Today, you can go find 10 or that will work on a fractional basis for I don't know, instead of $1 million, maybe $200,000. And so there's prestige. There's how do I sell my VC on the fact that I don't need labor now? What does that mean? I don't need to raise as much money. I'm not going to get to the next round. There's all these kind of games that get played on the small level. On the larger level, there's a lot of cultural issues, right? It's like, wait a second, if I work with outside people and they're better than me, like, what does that mean? What's my role? Will my role get taken? And there's a lot of existential threat that's happening. And I can see why. The average US organization spends 0.3% of somebody's salary on job specific training, whereas the average freelancer spends 15% of their time learning new tools. And so
Wow.
if you're thinking about the future, I would always bet on the learners, right? Like, who's
Mhm.
keeping up, who's playing with things. So that's happening. And then the other thing that's happening, I think that's really interesting that needs to be mentioned, is that what we found in our research was that lots of organizations are using open talent, but they're not, the employees that are using it just aren't telling anybody. And so if you lay out a scenario of, just think, Colson, if you just did some market research and you were in a really big company and you knew that the market research was going to change the launch of this product and is going to make your career and it's really insightful, and you're a week away from your big meeting, and so you email your graphic design deck creating department, and they say, sorry, Colson, it's 3 weeks out, we don't do decks, like, that's our
Yeah.
timeline. You'd be freaking out, right? You'd be like,
Yeah.
holy crap, this is so great, but I don't know how to do this. So you go to Google, you say freelancers help deck writing, you might find somebody on Fiverr, and that person's highly skilled, like, has the same amount of experience as your graphic design department, but maybe lives in a place that, it's not as expensive to live. And so you launch that night, and in the morning you wake up and this beautiful deck appears, and you work over it the next couple of days, and you do your presentation and you get a promotion. Well, that's your secret sauce, right? You're just like, oh my God, I'm going to create a whole team. I'm going to create like data scientists that can help me parse Excel spreadsheets, and people that can help me write decks, and maybe using generative AI to help me write marketing materials using these new tools. But you don't want to tell anybody, and that's what we've seen, right?
Mhm.
We've seen, in fact, Balaji Bandili at Deloitte, who is a big part of the book, said that when he took over all of contingent labor and open talent inside Deloitte, he thinks that only people would only tell him about 50% of what was being done
Wow.
because they were afraid that it was going to get re-bureaucratized, right? That
Yeah.
it's going to like have all these rules, and that proves out in the data. So if you look at freelancer.com is one of the platforms, they work with on an enterprise level, they work with a couple dozen, Fortune 500 companies. But when you look at the data of their customers, a full 70% of Fortune 500 companies have active emails as customers on Freelancer on a monthly basis. And so the companies don't even know they're working on that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really interesting. I think that's the same, if you take this one step further, that's what's happening in generative AI. People are saying, this is my secret sauce. I'm going to be able to write that great marketing plan tonight, and it's not going to be perfect. And I'm not going to rely totally on machine learning, but man, it's going to speed up my process from 5 days to 2 days, and I can just have so many cycles. Nobody needs to know, right? Nobody, no, you don't want to tell people. You want people to you want the kind of the glory or the reputation to accrue to you.
Yeah,
So
it's really it's one quote that I've said it before on a few different webinars, but we hear that like you're not going to be replaced by AI, but you will be replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI,
exactly, I think that's
right?
great. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
there's so many people that are afraid of change. I love that quote as well. As like, if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less.
yeah, exactly. I mean, one thing to actually, you bring up this secret sauce, right? It's astounding because if people are using, open talent or they're using these platforms, I wonder how they're costing for it, right? Because at some point you do have to tell your company that you are potentially using a freelancer,
Yeah.
or somebody, right, to account for it from, like you say, like a variable cost perspective, because it's a variable cost versus like now a fixed cost, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think there's even like at a higher managerial level, there's one executive that runs, a big division of one of the large technology companies that uses Upwork. He built his whole team on Upwork, and
Wow.
he every year his division gets like the most profitable, the best metrics, all that stuff because he's using a variable cost model.